Before I arrived in Asheville, after 37 years of wearing this uniform, I thought I knew what an old salt was. I was proved very wrong. And as Captain Ingalls may agree, Navy captains are never wrong, but when they're wrong, wow. So having said that, I must present my credentials because I'm overwhelmed by you fellas. I am a Mustang officer. I was a radarman third on a heavy cruiser during World War II. This uniform has to return to the rent-a-suit company in Asheville before midnight tonight, otherwise I'm out of luck. And what I wanted really to talk about was the brief time that the heavy cruiser USS St. Paul served as the flagship of the Yangtze River Patrol. The St. Paul participated in the last days of the war and went to Tokyo Bay with an armada of Allied ships, hundreds. After the surrender was signed, we stayed there for about 2 months. And we had a mean guy with 4 stripes on his sleeve who made us polish brass, do rope work, holy stone the deck, all manner of tough things to get that ship looking like a bandwagon. We then went to Shanghai, arriving on the 11th of November, 1945. And Admiral C. Turner Joy broke his flag as the commander of the Yangtze River Patrol, bringing to life an organization that had been disbanded on the 9th of December of 1941. It was a brief tenure, but it brought a presence back to Shanghai that had been missing during the years of his occupation. It was a miserably devastated city. As many of you may remember, the Paris of the Orient was not very Paris-like at that time. It came to life again, and the St. Paul was part of that. 1,700 of us, young men, went ashore, stayed at the Park Hotel, went to the racetrack. There was an Army-Navy game. It was life again. The St. Paul left Shanghai on the 6th of January, 1946, relieved by the USS Columbus, a sister ship, also of the Baltimore class. Columbus stayed there for about 6 months, and then once again, the Yangtze River Patrol was dissolved. So that fills in a little bit of history for a brief period of time when we did come alive again, and we tried to carry on in some small way the traditions that you fellows established. In no way does a Baltimore class cruiser patrol a river. Running aground is a very bad thing. So we left. I have had one impression that stands out in my mind since being here for the past 4 days, that I am in the company of brave men, some of whom were probably heroes, but not spoken of. You carried our flag of freedom and didn't let your hands loose of it until it could be relinquished to another generation. And I salute you. Let your activities never be forgotten.
There were just a few thousands of you out there.
No, an aircraft.
There, in numbers of human beings, sailors and Marines that were manning your fleet, there were just not that many people. And within a matter of 1 year, from the start of the war, when you people took your hit, there were millions of sailors in the Navy. There were hundreds, thousands of ships within just a short period of time. The public consciousness of World War II comes from those millions of sailors that came in after you. So if you look at when the war ended, there were millions and millions of sailors and Marines who had those experiences from late 1942 forward, and there were only thousands and thousands of you, and a lot of you didn't even come back because you were POWs until the end of the war itself. So as the history was written and as the stories were told, and they were great stories, they were great. It was a tremendous amount of history that took place between 1943, 44, and 45. And and the pages of ink that went out to the public, and the movies that filled the screens, and the books that were written by those millions and millions of soldiers and those millions and millions of eyes that saw a period of history that you also experienced, but you experienced a part that they never saw. And you were hidden under a ton of media and print that also covered great events of its time. We need to let people know what happened to you. And that's where the next generation that's here in this room tonight will come into play. But we have media now that wasn't even available 10 years ago to let people know about you. In my case, I stumbled on this whole thing by accident. I'll kind of explain this to you. But I had forgotten, hey, I didn't just forget about you, I forgot about the Navy for about 20 years or longer whenever I came out of the Navy. Because, you know, when I was in for the 3 years as an ensign and a lieutenant junior grade, it just struck me one day that this was too much like the military. I did rediscover the Navy through a friend of mine that invited me to ride. He was a CO of an Aegis cruiser, and I got to ride it back from Hawaii, and all this gadgetry and wizardry from the new Navy just left me totally impressed. And it reminded me of some of my own history with the Navy. So I began to get involved with the tin can sailors. And that's where I heard the one-eyed Salt talk about the USS Houston. And when I heard him talk about the Houston, I was saying to myself, why have I never heard this story? I mean, I'm a Navy guy, right? I was in tin cans. I mean, I've heard a lot of stories from World War II. I'd heard of the Java Sea, but it was kind of like, I'd heard of it, but I couldn't have told you much about it. And I wasn't really sure when it took place. But now, well, I went ahead and said this story was so good, so that's why I made that movie. And then I had to build a website to support the movie, and then from the website, I began to say, well, there's so much more here you can never put in a movie. So that kind of information goes into the internet now. And it's in that website, and it's more websites. And the email connections and the web connections that help you people find out what happened. There are amazing stories of people who find closure 60, 65 years after these events. People who had no clue what happened to their uncle. The guest book on the Houston site is just littered with entries that saying, thank you, I had no clue what happened to my uncle. I had no idea what happened to my father. I had no idea what my mother's, her first marriage, I mean, she had no idea what happened to her husband or whatever. But they just didn't know. But this opens up a whole venue for you to get your word out, and more people learn about what happened to themselves, to their own families, to their own people. And so I encourage you to use the web as much as you can. Last night was one of those examples of what happens whenever people find out that they have a heritage here that they never knew about. And last night, several people from the Edsel family, of course, the Edsel was lost without a trace. And these people had no idea what happened to the people with the Edsel. But little by little, there's information that becomes available, and people learn. Other parts come together, and the web makes that possible. And these people are finding closure to events that happened so long ago. What is it that makes you people so special? Is that you were there alone, and you stood off an enemy force with absolutely no help coming to you. It was like an Alamo situation. And yet we still don't have the media mass to let the world know exactly what you did. But we will. We will. We will let the world know, and you won't be forgotten. From Dutch Cooper, who was, when the Houston was going down and the chattering machine guns were still being fired from the masts of the Houston. As it went down, somebody was still up, a Marine, was still up there firing away at the searchlights on all the cruisers and the Japanese cruisers and destroyers that surrounded the ship. And as it was going out and Cooper was getting away from the ship, he could see this flag lit by spotlights from the Japanese cruisers as it went down. And what Dutch said was that made him more proud than at any time he's ever had in his life. And here he was, having lost his ship, most of the crew and his friends, but to see that they had fought to the very, very bitter end, and he saw that flag go under, unsurrendered. And that's what made him so proud. Dutch is gone now, but the memory is there with all of you. You stayed with it until the end, and you fought till you couldn't fight anymore. And we're proud of you, and your history will continue. And I thank you for it, and it's a heritage for all of us. Thank you very much.
The last fight of the Edsel, like the last fight of the entire fleet, was extremely heroic. The Edsel faced four Japanese. The Edsel faced four Japanese men of war in a 90-minute running engagement. Over 1,300 rounds were fired by these Japanese battleships, but they could never hit the Edsel. The Japanese recognized some very superior ship handling on the part of the crew. They were finally stopped by a massive air bombardment. And we're bringing this information to the public in the form of a book next year, along with footage that was taken by my grandfather during his tour of duty from 39 on the Black Hawk to 1940 and 41 aboard the Edsel. I never got to say thank you to my grandfather for his sacrifice, and so I'd like to thank you instead. You guys did a hell of a job in the face of overwhelming odds. It's inspiring to me and to more and more people. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain of the Submarine Task Force. My name is Jim Hewan. I'm age 65. I was born in April 1941, 8 months before Pearl Harbor. My father was born in 1910, and when he was 20 years old in 1930, we're Cantonese, and Tien, my friend, is Shanghainese. Big difference. He speaks Mandarin, I speak Cantonese. We can't communicate verbally. My father was born in a village in Yinping County, about 150 miles due west of Hong Kong. And of course, Canton, which is now Guangzhou, was the biggest city then. Anyway, in 1930, he was in Hong Kong, and we came from very poor peasant families. My grandfathers died in the when they were like in their 20s. So my father kind of, was an orphan at the age of maybe 8 or 9 years old. He had two cousins, and one joined the Navy in 1928. Can you believe that? As a mess attendant. In fact, Tien's father probably joined the Navy as a boatman in 1923, and then became, a mess attendant in 1926. I mean, we're talking about history, folks. He joined the Navy, of course, because there were absolutely zero opportunity to make a living. And at the fantastic sum of $21 a month as a mess attendant third class, that was considered a fortune, because in Admiral Tully's book, he documented, on certain page, that was almost as much as an Army colonel made in the Chinese Army. Prior to that, my father was on the Mindanao, the Tulsa, the Augusta, and the Houston, back and forth among these ships. Tien's father was on, you name all the gunboats that was on the Yangtze River, his father was on it. So when World War II started, We didn't see my father for 4 to 5 years. We had no money. My mother was selling her jewelry, the little that she had. She also came from a very peasant background, and my parents only had like 4 or 5 years of Chinese schools. So we were starving like crazy. My sister remember taking bark off a tree to make soup out of it, cutting the field grass, eating field mice for protein. That's how bad it was. So that's about a year and a half at this time, 1942. She was still nursing me, so she had to take me with her, and she took 2 or 3 days by foot or by car or hitchhiking, whatever, to travel 150 miles to Macau. Right before Macau, and this is a true story, she told me that she saw some Japanese soldiers with rifles and fixed bayonets. I was about a year and a half, and they were going to take her away from her arms and just bayonet me for the heck of it. I mean, that shows you the Japanese cruelty mentality in those days. And my mother pleaded for my life, and somehow they let me go. So that's a true story, and we've always talk about that during our family gatherings. After the war, we moved back to Hong Kong, then the Navy sent us to Shanghai, and finally to Tsingtao. And in Tsingtao, that's where all the huge naval bases were. And my father, since he was a U.S. citizen, was given the opportunity to immigrate his entire family to the U.S., and we went to San Francisco. He was still on active duty, and we went to Coronado Naval Air Station. I think that was his first short duty in 16 years. And I said, how did he come to get his citizenship when he never came to the 48 states? And I just recently found out that, and I was in the Navy, remember, that American vessel is considered American soil. I joined the Navy, was assigned to a repair ship, and finally I found out what the Navy did, and what this, as a supply corps officer, I finally found out what the Stewards did. And I served 3 years with like Vic Campbell here. I asked the officers at that time, did they know about the Asiatic fleet? And most of them said no. So, and when I found you guys on the internet, I was so gratified. And in the 4 or 5 days here, you guys are just like fathers to me, and I really appreciate it. I love all of you guys. You guys are great. I salute you.
Good deal.